On the 25th of June, 1876, the greasy grass bloomed with blood as George Armstrong Custer's 7th Cavalry charged into a Lakota encampment, unaware of the storm awaiting them. Two boys, barely teens, stood guard over horses, their shouts of alarm sparking a rout that would echo through history. The soldiers scattered like leaves in a gale, one later recalled, his words preserved in Lakota fireside tales. Yet, Sitting Bull, the Hunkpapa visionary, foresaw not victory but Sufferinga prophecy ignored in the heat of battle. Why did this triumph at Little Bighorn sow seeds of tragedy for the Lakota? Stay with us to uncover the truth hidden in oral history. In 1874, the discovery of gold in the Black Hills unleashed a torrent of American avarice, shattering the fragile promises of the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty, which had guaranteed the Lakota exclusive rights to this sacred territory. Miners and settlers swarmed the region, ignoring the treaty stipulations, with an estimated 15,000 prospectors flooding the area by 1875, according to historian Robert Utley. This blatant violation stirred deep unrest among the Lakota, who saw their spiritual and economic heartland defiled by outsiders driven by greed. Sitting Bull, the revered Hunkpapa Lakota leader, responded with a clarion call for resistance. Known for his spiritual visions and unyielding commitment to Lakota sovereignty, he summoned non-treaty bands to a grand council. By 1876, at age 45, Sitting Bull had become a symbol of defiance, rallying his people against the U.S. government's relentless expansion. His leadership was not rooted in military ambition, but in a profound desire to preserve the traditional Lakota way of life, as noted by biographer D. Brown, who described him as a visionary statesman. The gathering drew not organized tribes, but individual families and small groups from the Lakota, Cheyenne, and other nations. These were people who rejected the confines of U.S.-imposed reservations, seeking freedom in the open plains. By spring 1876, an estimated 7,000 to 8,000 individuals, including 2,000 warriors, had joined the encampment, according to archaeological surveys and native oral accounts. Their movement was a quiet rebellion, a collective yearning for autonomy rather than a prelude to war. The encampment took root along Rosebud Creek, a serene waterway in present-day Montana. Here, the Lakota and their allies formed a sprawling community, their numbers dwarfed by their vast horse herds. Each family maintained between 2 and 5 horses, a mark of wealth and mobility, totaling perhaps 10,000 animals, as estimated by historian Nathaniel Philbrick. These horses, essential for hunting and warfare, grazed voraciously, stripping the creek's banks bare and creating a logistical challenge for the camp. As the horses consumed the grass, food supplies dwindled. Antelope, once plentiful, grew scarce under the pressure of the camp's size, with hunters reporting fewer sightings by early June. The Lakota faced a stark reality: remain and starve or seek new hunting grounds. This scarcity, noted in Cheyenne oral histories, underscored the precarious balance of life on the plains, where survival hinged on constant adaptation. Scouts, skilled trackers dispatched to survey the region, returned with promising news. They had found abundant antelope herds in the valley of the Greasy Grass, known today as the Little Bighorn River, roughly 50 miles west of Rosebud Creek. The discovery, detailed in Lakota accounts preserved by Ernie LaPointe, prompted a swift decision to relocate. The move was not strategic in a military sense, but a practical response to immediate needs, reflecting the Lakota's deep knowledge of the land. By mid-June 1876, the camp uprooted and resettled along the Little Bighorn, its typet stretching across the fertile valley. Unbeknownst to the Lakota, the U.S. Army, under General Alfred Terry, was closing in, with George Armstrong Custer's 7th Cavalry leading the pursuit. The Lakota, numbering perhaps 1,500 families, prepared for a feast to celebrate the antelope hunt, their focus on sustenance rather than conflict, as corroborated by Minneconjou survivor Dewey Beard's later testimony. A grim irony hung over the scene. While Custer, a 36-year-old lieutenant colonel with a reputation for reckless ambition, schemed for a decisive victory to bolster his fame, the Lakota planned a communal celebration. Historian James Donovan, in A Terrible Glory, notes Custer's belief that a single, bold strike could crush the hostiles and secure his legacy. The Lakota, by contrast, were unaware of the storm gathering on the horizon, their thoughts fixed on the bounty of the greasy grass. The relocation to the Little Bighorn exemplified Lakota pragmatism. Unlike the rigid strategies of the U.S. military, their decision-making was fluid, driven by environmental cues and communal needs. This adaptability, as scholar Joseph Marshall III argues, was a hallmark of Lakota survival, enabling them to thrive in a harsh landscape. The move was not a prelude to battle, but a calculated effort to sustain their people, a choice rooted in centuries of Plains wisdom. Yet, this pragmatic shift set the stage for a collision that would reverberate through history. The Lakota's focus on survival, contrasted with Custer's pursuit of glory, revealed a fundamental misunderstanding. The U.S. Army viewed the encampment as a military threat, while the Lakota saw it as a sanctuary for their way of life. This disconnect, as historian Robert Utley observes, fueled the tragedy of the 25th of June, 1876, when the greasy grass would run red with blood. The encampment along the Little Bighorn River, known to the Lakota as the Greasy Grass, stretched across the valley in June 1876, a vibrant tapestry of human connection. Comprising an estimated 7,000 to 8,000 people, including Hunkpapa, Oglala, Minneconjou, and Cheyenne, the camp was a living community, not a military stronghold. According to historian Nathaniel Philbrick, this gathering included roughly 2,000 warriors, with families making up the majority. The diversity of the camp reflected a shared resolve to resist U.S. encroachment, each group bound by a common purpose yet distinct in identity. Teepees dotted the landscape, their placement guided by kinship and friendship rather than rigid tribal divisions. A family might arrive and hear a familiar voice call out, "Pitch your lodge here," as recounted in Lakota oral histories preserved by Ernie LaPointe. This organic arrangement, with an estimated 1,500 teepees spread over 3 miles, fostered a sense of unity. Unlike the orderly campsites of U.S. military doctrine, the Greasy Grass encampment pulsed with the rhythm of community, where personal ties trumped formal structure. A persistent myth, perpetuated by early historians like Evan Connell, claims the camp was neatly segmented. Hunkpapa in the south, Oglala in the center, Cheyenne in the north. Archaeological surveys from the 1980s, including those by Richard Fox, debunked this notion, revealing a fluid layout with tipis intermingled based on social bonds. This misconception reflects a Western tendency to impose military order on native societies, ignoring their communal ethos. The reality, as Lakota accounts emphasize, was a camp shaped by relationships, not battle lines. At the southern end, Sitting Bull's Hunkpapa band formed the largest group, numbering perhaps 2,500 people, including 700 warriors, per estimates by historian Robert Utley. Yet even this core was not fixed. Families moved freely, visiting allies or joining kin. Sitting Bull, then 45, led not as a general but as a spiritual and political anchor, his authority rooted in wisdom rather than coercion. His presence, as D. Brown notes in Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, drew others to the camp, creating a hub of resistance and renewal. The Strong Heart Society, known in Lakota as Chante Tinza Uglala Kichie, played a pivotal role in the camp's cohesion. Often mislabeled warrior societies by U.S. observers, these groups were not militaristic but embodiments of Lakota values: honor, generosity, and protection. Comprising perhaps 100 men, per oral accounts, the Strongheart Society ensured the camp's safety, mediated disputes, and provided for the vulnerable. Historian Joseph Marshall III describes them as caretakers of the people, a stark contrast to the aggressive image painted by 19th-century newspapers. This caregiving ethos clashed sharply with U.S. military assumptions. American commanders, including George Armstrong Custer, viewed native societies through a lens of warfare, expecting organized resistance akin to their own ranks. The Lakota, however, prioritized community survival, their societies designed to nurture rather than conquer. This misunderstanding, as scholar James Welch argues, blinded the 7th Cavalry to the camp's resilience, setting the stage for a catastrophic miscalculation. In the northern reaches of the camp, vast horse herds grazed, a critical asset under the watchful eyes of young boys. Numbering perhaps 10,000, these horses were vital for hunting, travel, and, if needed, battle. Boys like Little Soldier and Refuses Them, aged 10 to 12, were tasked with preventing stampedes, a responsibility that underscored the camp's reliance on every member. Their vigilance, detailed in Lakota oral tradition, ensured the horses remained secure, ready for the antelope hunts that sustained the community. Little Soldier, the son of Four Robes, and Refuses Them, the deaf-mute son of Seen by Her Nation, were stepsons of Sitting Bull, integrated into his extended family. Little Soldier, likely named for his spirited demeanor, could speak and later shared vivid accounts of the battle. Refuses Them, known as John Sitting Bull, in Buffalo Bill Cody's Wild West show, communicated through sign language, his disability no barrier to his role in the camp. Their presence, as Ernie LaPointe recounts, highlights the inclusive nature of Lakota families, where biological and adopted kin shared equal standing. The name Four Robes, correctly rendered as Wiyukan Maniwin in Lakota, corrects a likely error in oral transcription, where Foros appeared in some records. Four Robes, one of Sitting Bull's two wives alongside Seen by Her Nation, was a respected figure, her influence evident in her son's storytelling. The correction, supported by genealogical records in Robert Utley's The Lance and the Shield, ensures accuracy, grounding the narrative in verifiable history. The boy's biological father, Burlouse, remains a shadowy figure, his name absent from written records. Possibly a Lakota name lost to time or a mistranslation, Burlouse underscores the challenges of oral history, where details can fade. While unverifiable, his mention in LaPointe's account suggests a real individual, perhaps a minor figure in the pre-1876 Lakota community. This obscurity, as historian Thomas Powers notes, reminds us that Native histories often preserve names overlooked by Western chroniclers, demanding respect for their authenticity. On the 25th of June, 1876, as dawn broke over the Little Bighorn Valley, Major Marcus Reno led 140 men of the 7th Cavalry in a sudden charge against the southern Hunkpapa village. Commanding Companies A, G, and M, along with Arikara Scouts, Reno's force, numbering roughly 175 with scouts, descended on the encampment at approximately 3 a.m., according to military reports compiled by historian John Gray. The Hunkpapa, led by Sitting Bull, were caught off guard, their tippish housing an estimated 2,500 people still quiet in the early light. Reno's orders, issued by George Armstrong Custer, were to strike hard and drive the Lakota northward, where Custer planned a second assault. The attack shattered the morning calm. Women and children, numbering perhaps 1,500 in the Hunkpapa camp, fled in panic, grabbing belongings and racing toward the river or nearby hills, as recounted in Lakota oral histories. Warriors, estimated at 700 by historian Robert Utley, sprang into action, seizing rifles, bows, and war clubs. Armed with an estimated 300 repeating rifles, including Winchesters and traditional weapons, they mounted a fierce counterattack. Within minutes, the Hunkpapa turned the tide, forcing Reno's men to falter under a hail of bullets and arrows, their initial charge crumbling against the defenders' resolve. Reno's assault collapsed swiftly, and by 3:30 a.m., his battalion retreated across the Little Bighorn River, seeking cover in a dense timber stand on the western bank. The retreat was chaotic, with 25 soldiers killed in the initial clash, per official U.S. Army reports from 1876, and another 14 wounded, as noted by archaeologist Richard Fox. Shaken and disorganized, Reno's men huddled in the timber, their morale shattered by the Lakota's ferocity. The Hunkpapa pursued, maintaining pressure until Reno's position became a desperate holdout, with survivors later reporting relentless gunfire from warriors positioned in nearby ravines. The Southern battle drew the bulk of the camp's warriors, estimated at 1,200 to 1,500 across all bands, including Oglala and Cheyenne reinforcements. This massive response left the northern end of the encampment, stretching 3 miles along the river, temporarily exposed. The shift in focus, as described by Minneconjou survivor Dewey Beard, reflected the Lakota's priority: protect the vulnerable at all costs. Warriors streamed south, leaving only a skeleton crew to guard the northern horse herds, a decision that would soon prove critical. In the northern camp, 2 young boys, Little Soldier and Refuses Them, aged 10 to 12, stood watch over the horse herds. Little Soldier, son of 4 Robes, and Refuses Them, the deaf-mute son of Seen by Her Nation, were stepsons of Sitting Bull, tasked with preventing stampedes among the 10. 0 horses grazing there, per Lakota oral accounts. Stationed on a rise overlooking the valley, they scanned the horizon, their small frames belying the weight of their responsibility. Their role, preserved in Ernie LaPointe's family stories, underscores the camp's reliance on every member, even its youngest, in times of crisis. Reno's failure exposed the fatal flaw in Custer's strategy. Custer had divided his 600-man regiment into 3 battalions: Reno's 140, Captain Frederick Benteen's 125, and his own 210, with additional scouts and pack trains. This fragmentation, critiqued by historian James Donovan in A Terrible Glory, assumed the Lakota would flee rather than fight. Custer, aged 36 and driven by ambition, underestimated the camp's size and cohesion, a miscalculation that left Reno isolated and overwhelmed. The split, intended to encircle the enemy, instead diluted the 7th Cavalry's strength, setting the stage for disaster. A bitter irony permeated the U.S. tactics. Military planners, steeped in Civil War doctrines, assumed the Lakota would behave like a static foe, easily scattered by a show of force. Yet, as historian Nathaniel Philbrick notes, the Lakota's mobility and resolve defied these expectations. With an estimated 2,000 warriors across the camp, supported by a fluid, community-driven structure, they adapted swiftly, turning Reno's attack into a rout. The Army's rigid approach, blind to native ingenuity, sowed the seeds of its own defeat. The Lakota fought not for glory, but for survival, their actions a desperate defense of families and homeland. Unlike Custer, whose pursuit of fame was well documented in his 1874 memoir My Life on the Plains, the Lakota sought only to protect their way of life, threatened by the U.S. government's relentless expansion. This motivation, as scholar Joseph Marshall III argues, fueled their ferocity, transforming a peaceful encampment into a formidable force. The battle was not a quest for conquest, but a stand against annihilation, rooted in the 1868 treaty's broken promises. Oral history, as preserved by figures like Little Soldier, reveals the camp's collective effort in stark detail. The boys' vigilance over the horses, the warriors' rapid response, and the women's flight to safety paint a vivid picture of a community united under pressure. These accounts, often sidelined by early historians, offer a corrective to narratives that focus solely on U.S. perspectives. As historian Thomas Powers emphasizes, native oral traditions provide granular insights such as the boys' role that enrich our understanding of the battle's dynamics. Mainstream accounts, particularly in 19th century newspapers like the New York Herald, often framed the Lakota as savage aggressors, ignoring the U.S. Army's provocation. This bias, critique by D. Brown in Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, obscured the context. The Lakota were defending their land against an unprovoked attack, following the theft of the Black Hills and repeated treaty violations. By 1876, the U.S. had forcibly relocated 10,000 Lakota to reservations, per government records, fueling resentment that erupted at the Little Bighorn. The battle, far from an act of barbarism, was a calculated response to existential threats, a truth too often buried under layers of prejudice. George Armstrong Custer, commanding 210 men of the 7th Cavalry, approached the northern end of the Little Bighorn encampment from the east through Deep Ravine on the 25th of June, 1876. Leading Companies C, E, F, I, and L, Custer's battalion, totaling roughly 210 soldiers and 20 scouts, moved stealthily along the rugged terrain, as detailed in military reports analyzed by historian John Gray. At 36, Custer was a seasoned officer, his ambition fueled by a desire for a decisive victory, as noted in his 1874 memoir, My Life on the Plains. His target was the northern village, where he believed the Lakota and Cheyenne were vulnerable. Custer's plan hinged on exploiting the chaos caused by Major Marcus Reno's earlier attack on the southern Hunkpapa village. With an estimated 1,200 warriors drawn south to repel Reno, Custer aimed to strike swiftly, capturing women and children to force a Lakota surrender. This tactic, used previously in the 1868 Washita Massacre where Custer's forces killed 103 Cheyenne, was documented by historian Robert Utley as a deliberate strategy to break Native resistance. Custer, believing the camp held only 1,000 warriors, underestimated its size 7,000 to 8,000 people, including 2,000 fighters, per archaeological surveys. Little Soldier, a 10-year-old son of 4 robes, stood watch over the northern horse herds, his eyes scanning the river's edge. Stationed alongside Refuses Them, his deaf-mute stepbrother, the boys guarded an estimated 10,000 horses, a critical asset for the camp's survival. As Custer's blue-coated soldiers emerged from Deep Ravine, their uniforms catching the midday sun, Little Soldier's sharp gaze detected them. Lakota oral histories, preserved by Ernie LaPointe, recount the moment vividly, emphasizing the boys' crucial role in spotting the threat at approximately 4 p.m., per modern reconstructions. The boys' shouts pierced the air, alerting nearby warriors to the danger. An estimated 500 fighters, including Hunkpapa, Oglala, and Cheyenne, responded instantly, as calculated by historian Nathaniel Philbrick based on Native accounts. These warriors, stationed near the northern teepees, were a mix of seasoned men and young braves, their numbers bolstered by stragglers returning from the Reno fight. The alarm, as Minneconjou survivor Dewey Beard later described, transformed the northern camp into a hive of activity, with warriors grabbing weapons and mounting horses. Armed with an estimated 300 repeating rifles, including Winchester Model 1873s and traditional bows, the warriors opened fire on Custer's column as it neared the river. The initial volley was devastating. 2 soldiers fell from their horses, their bodies crumpling at the water's edge, according to Lakota accounts. Archaeological evidence from 1980s excavations, led by Richard Fox, confirms concentrated gunfire at this ford, with bullet casings indicating heavy Lakota resistance. The sudden attack shattered Custer's expectation of an easy crossing, exposing his miscalculation of the camp's defensive strength. As the warriors' fire intensified, a fallen trooper, possibly an officer, was hoisted back onto a horse by his comrades, a desperate act witnessed by Little Soldier. This moment, detailed in oral histories, suggests an attempt to save a key figure, perhaps Captain Miles Keogh or Lieutenant James Calhoun, both later found dead nearby. The effort failed, as the Lakota's relentless barrage drove the soldiers back. Historian James Donovan notes that such acts of loyalty, while brave, were futile against the warriors' numerical and tactical advantage at this critical juncture. Custer's column, expecting to surprise a distracted enemy, instead faced a wall of resistance. Panic gripped the soldiers as their formation broke, with men scattering in disarray, as described in Cheyenne accounts corroborated by historian Gregory Michno. The 210-man battalion, trained for disciplined maneuvers, crumbled under the warriors' onslaught, their cohesion lost within minutes. Custer, likely positioned near the river, struggled to rally his men, but the speed and ferocity of the Lakota response overwhelmed his command, as evidenced by the tight clustering of artifacts at the ford. Little Soldier, years later, recounted the scene with a child's vivid awe. The soldiers, scattered like frightened deer, their blue coats disappearing into the dust. This description, preserved in Lakota oral tradition, captures the chaos of Custer's collapse. The warriors, leveraging their knowledge of the terrain, crossed the river in pursuit, their horses thundering across the shallow ford. An estimated 300 fighters engaged directly, with others joining from the south, creating a pincer movement that trapped Custer's men, per reconstructions by archaeologist Douglas Scott. The pursuit was relentless, with warriors cutting down soldiers before they could reach the high ground later known as Last Stand Hill. The fighting, concentrated along a half-mile stretch from the river to the hill, left a trail of bodies and spent cartridges, as mapped in 1980s archaeological surveys. Custer's men, armed with single-shot Springfield carbines, were outgunned by the Lakota's repeaters, which fired up to 15 rounds per minute compared to the carbine's 3, PER military historian John Keegan. This disparity, combined with the warriors' mobility, sealed the soldiers' fate. The engagement at the river ford lasted mere minutes, perhaps 20, according to native accounts compiled by historian Joseph Marshall III. The speed of the rout stunned even the Lakota, who expected a longer fight. By 4:20 p.m., Custer's battalion was in full retreat, its survivors fleeing toward the hill where their final stand would unfold. The brevity of this clash, as D. Brown notes in Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, underscores the Lakota's tactical brilliance, turning Custer's ambush into a catastrophic failure. The northern village, far from vulnerable, became the anvil on which Custer's dreams of glory were crushed. The rout of George Armstrong Custer's battalion on the 25th of June, 1876, was a swift and merciless end to his 210-man force. By 4:30 p.m., nearly all of Custer's men, approximately 200 soldiers, excluding a few scouts who fled early, lay dead across the slopes of Last Stand Hill and the surrounding ridges. Archaeological excavations in the 1980s, led by Richard Fox and Douglas Scott, uncovered a grim tableau: scattered Springfield carbine casings, Lakota arrowheads, and human remains confirmed no survivors among the core battalion. The precise count of 197 dead, as reported by U.S. Army records in 1876, underscores the total annihilation of Custer's command, a stark testament to the Lakota and Cheyenne's ferocity. Custer himself was found atop Last Stand Hill, his body sprawled among his fallen comrades. 2 bullet wounds marked him, one in the left chest, piercing his heart, and another in the left temple, as detailed in both Lakota oral accounts and U.S. military reports from July 1876. The chest wound, likely fatal, suggests he fell early in the final clash, while the temple shot raises questions about his final moments. At 36, Custer was a recognizable figure, yet his body bore no signs of the flamboyant persona he cultivated. His death, as historian Robert Utley notes, marked the end of a career built on audacity and ambition. Gone was Custer's iconic long hair, once a flowing mane celebrated in dime novels. In 1876, he had cropped it short, adopting a practical style for the campaign, as confirmed by his adjutant's testimony in the 1879 Reno Court of Inquiry. He wore a standard blue cavalry uniform, not the buckskin jacket of popular lore, a detail corroborated by survivor accounts from Captain Frederick Bentine's battalion. This unassuming appearance, as archaeologist Richard Fox observes, may have spared Custer initial recognition by the Lakota, but it did not save him from their wrath. Speculation swirled among the Lakota about the temple wound. Some, as recounted by Ernie LaPointe's family, believed Custer or his brother, Captain Tom Custer, fired the shot to avoid capture. Tom, aged 31 and a two-time Medal of Honor recipient, was found nearby, his body riddled with wounds. The suicide theory, supported by Cheyenne oral histories, posits a desperate act to evade the fate of captured soldiers who faced death or humiliation. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick, in The Last Stand, notes that such acts were not uncommon in 19th century warfare, though no definitive evidence confirms this claim, leaving it a haunting possibility. Lakota cultural beliefs shaped their treatment of Custer's body. A warrior who took his own life was deemed a coward, his spirit tainted and unworthy of honor. According to Lakota oral tradition, preserved by Little Soldier, taking trophies from such a man risked absorbing his weakness, a belief echoed by historian Joseph Marshall III. Consequently, Custer's body was left untouched, his short hair unscalped, his uniform unstripped. This restraint, as Minneconjou survivor Dewey Beard later recounted, reflected a deliberate choice, rooted in spiritual conviction rather than mercy. In contrast, many of Custer's men, approximately 150, per archaeological estimates, suffered post-mortem mutilation, a common practice among Plains tribes to dishonor enemies or ensure their spirits could not harm the living. Scalping, arrow piercing, and body dismemberment were reported by U.S. burial parties in July 1876, with 80% of recovered bodies showing such marks, per historian John Gray. Custer's untouched state, as D. Brown notes in Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, stands out, suggesting selective restraint by the Lakota, who distinguish between a coward's death and a warrior's fall. This contrast challenges the narrative of indiscriminate savagery peddled by 19th century media. The New York Herald in July 1876 described the battle as a barbaric massacre, ignoring the Lakota's cultural framework and the provocation of Custer's attack. The selective treatment of Custer, as historian Thomas Powers argues, reveals a disciplined adherence to Lakota values, even in the heat of victory. The warrior's actions were not random but guided by a moral code, a nuance often erased in U.S.-centric accounts. Amid the chaos, a lighter moment emerged, preserved in Lakota oral history. A 19-year-old warrior, unnamed but vivid in Little Soldier's recollection, struggled to mount his feisty war pony near the northern horse herds. Handing his rifle and bow to Little Soldier, he chased the spirited horse, which circled defiantly, delaying his entry into the fight. By the time he subdued the pony and crossed the Little Bighorn River, the battle was over. This anecdote, recounted by Ernie LaPointe, captures the human side of the conflict, where youthful zeal met the unpredictability of war. The young warrior's tardiness underscores the battle's astonishing brevity. The final clash on Last Stand Hill, per native accounts compiled by Gregory Micknow, lasted no more than 20 minutes, ending by 4:50 p.m. An estimated 500 to 700 warriors, wielding 300 repeating rifles and countless arrows, overwhelmed Custer's 200 men, who fired only 1,200 rounds per 1980s ballistic analysis. The Lakota's speed and firepower, as James Donovan notes in A Terrible Glory, turned the hill into a killing ground, leaving no time for the heroic defense of popular myth. The romanticized notion of Custer's last stand, immortalized in paintings and 19th century ballads, crumbles under scrutiny. Far from a valiant holdout, the battle was a tactical overwhelm, with Custer's men outmaneuvered and outgunned. Historian Evan Connell, in Son of the Morning Star, critiques the myth as a distortion that glorifies Custer while ignoring the Lakota's strategic brilliance. The warriors, fighting to protect 5,000 non-combatants, executed a devastating counterattack, their victory a testament to unity and resolve, not the savage triumph of U.S. lore. In the aftermath of the Battle of Little Bighorn on the 25th of June, 1876, Sitting Bull, the Hunkpapa Lakota leader, had foreseen a path of restraint through a sacred vision. At 45, known for his spiritual insight, he urged his warriors to leave the 200 fallen soldiers of Custer's 7th Cavalry untouched. No scalps were to be taken, no trophies claimed, no bodies mutilated. This directive, rooted in Lakota spiritual beliefs, aimed to preserve the moral integrity of the victory and avoid provoking supernatural or earthly retribution, as detailed in oral histories preserved by Ernie Lapointe. Sitting Bull's vision, according to historian Robert Utley, reflected a strategic foresight, recognizing that desecrating the dead could inflame U.S. vengeance. Yet, in the heat of triumph, some warriors defied this command, driven by rage over years of U.S. aggression, such as the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty violations and the 1874 Black Hills Gold Rush. Estimated 150 of the 200 fallen soldiers were scalped or mutilated, per U.S. Army burial reports from July 1876. Warriors pierced bodies with arrows, removed limbs, or took personal items, practices common among Plains tribes to dishonor enemies or ensure their spirits pose no threat. Archaeologist Richard Fox, in 1980's excavations, found 80% of recovered remains showed such marks, confirming the extent of this defiance. This act, as Cheyenne accounts note, was both a release of pent-up grief and a cultural assertion, though it strayed from Sitting Bull's counsel. Sitting Bull, his heart heavy, rode through the battlefield in the late afternoon, surveying the carnage. The sight of mutilated body soldiers strewn across Last Stand Hill and the surrounding slopes confirmed his worst fears. He foresaw that this violation would bring dire consequences, a retribution that would haunt future generations. Lakota oral tradition, as recounted by Lapointe, captures his somber realization. The warrior's actions, while understandable, had sown seeds of suffering. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick, in The Last Stand, interprets this moment as Sitting Bull's recognition of a moral and strategic misstep, one that would invite relentless U.S. reprisals. The historical fallout was swift and brutal. The U.S. Army, stung by the loss of 268 men, including Custer, intensified its campaigns against the Lakota and Cheyenne. By 1877, General Nelson Miles led 3,000 troops in a relentless pursuit, forcing 4,000 Lakota onto reservations, per government records. The Great Sioux War, sparked by the Little Bighorn, saw the confiscation of 40 million acres of Lakota land by 1880, as documented by historian D. Brown. The victory, meant to preserve Lakota autonomy, instead accelerated their dispossession, a bitter fulfillment of Sitting Bull's prophecy. This retribution culminated in the Wounded Knee Massacre on the 29th of December, 1890. When the 7th Cavalry killed approximately 300 Lakota, including 200 women and children, at Pine Ridge, South Dakota. The massacre, detailed in James Mooney's 1896 report, was a direct legacy of the post-1876 crackdown, with soldiers explicitly citing Custer's defeat as justification. Sitting Bull, assassinated 2 weeks earlier at age 59, did not live to witness this tragedy, but his vision had foretold it. The slaughter, as historian Joseph Marshall III notes, marked the final crushing of Lakota resistance, tying the Little Bighorn's triumph to a cycle of loss. Lakota oral history, preserved through generations, offers a profound insight into this tragedy. The violation of Sitting Bull's vision, as recounted by Little Soldier, links the battle's immediate victory to long-term suffering. These accounts, unlike U.S. military reports, emphasize the spiritual and human cost, capturing the tension between warriors' rage and their leaders' restraint. Historian Thomas Powers, in The Killing of Crazy Horse, praises oral traditions for preserving such nuances, revealing the Lakota's internal debates and moral complexities often ignored by Western chroniclers. Dewey Beard, a Minneconjou warrior who fought at Little Bighorn at age 17, later shared these stories with Lapointe's family in the early 20th century. Beard, who survived Wounded Knee and died in 1955 at 96, recounted the battle's aftermath with clarity, emphasizing Sitting Bull's foresight. His testimony, as recorded in Lakota archives, underscores the continuity of oral history, with figures like Beard serving as living bridges between 1876 and later generations. His presence in LaPointe's home, alongside Little Soldier and Refuses Them, illustrates the enduring power of communal storytelling, a practice that sustained Lakota identity through decades of hardship. The strength of Lakota oral tradition lies in its ability to preserve details lost in U.S.-centric narratives. While 19th-century newspapers like the Chicago Tribune framed the battle as a savage outrage, ignoring the context of U.S. treaty violations, Lakota accounts highlight the moral dilemma of the mutilations. These stories, as scholar Gregory Michno argues, offer a counter-narrative that humanizes the warriors, portraying them not as bloodthirsty, but as defenders of a way of life under siege. The oral record, with its focus on Sitting Bull's vision, adds depth to the historical record, challenging simplistic depictions of Native violence. A cruel irony defines the battle's legacy. The Lakota's triumph, a stunning defeat of 210 U.S. soldiers by an estimated 2,000 warriors, became a prelude to their confinement. By 1881, 10,000 Lakota lived on reservations, their horse herds reduced from 50,000 to 5,000 per Bureau of Indian Affairs data. The victory, as historian Evan Connell observes, galvanized U.S. resolve to subdue the Plains tribes, transforming a moment of glory into a catalyst for dispossession. The greasy grass, once a symbol of resistance, became a marker of loss, its victory Pyrrhic in the face of overwhelming odds. The Battle of Little Bighorn reveals the profound cost of resistance in a world bent on conquest. The Lakota and Cheyenne, fighting to protect 5,000 non-combatants, achieved a tactical masterpiece, overwhelming Custer's battalion in under an hour. Yet, as Sitting Bull foresaw, the violation of his vision invited a backlash that decimated their freedom. Historian James Donovan, in A Terrible Glory, reflects that the battle encapsulates the tragedy of Native resistance, a heroic stand against an empire too vast to overcome. The warriors' defiance, though glorious, could not halt the tide of U.S. expansion, leaving a legacy of both pride and sorrow. As the dust settled on the greasy grass, the Lakota stood victorious, their courage etched in the voices of boys like Little Soldier and Refuses Them. Yet, Sitting Bull's unheeded vision reminds us that triumph can carry a bitter price. With profound respect for the Native peoples who defended their way of life, we honor their resilience and wisdom. What does it mean to win a battle but lose a future? Let that question linger as we reflect on the enduring spirit of the Lakota.